Hi, I'm Doug from Global West, and we thought we'd take a minute here and talk to you about our frame braces that we make for the rear of A-bodies. That's 64 to 72. Now, A-bodies consist of Chevelles, GTO, Cutlass, GS. Actually, there's quite a list. And we've got a frame here. This is a back section that we use for a display, but we want to talk about these particular supports here. These supports support the pickup point on the lower control arm. When we do it, it triangulates into the cross member at the top. We make two different ones. We make a TS47, which is this kit we have on this table here, and then we make a TS82. The TS47 is for 1964 through 67 models, and the TS82 is 1968 to 1972. And the difference between the two is basically length. Concept is the same. The parts we furnish in the kit are pretty much the same in reference to the bolts and spacers and what have you. But there are two different ones based off your frames. Now, we want to tell you why you want to be interested in something like this. Back in those days, the original lower control arms on these A-bodies, they were channeled. So you had your rubber bushings in there and then they had a channel. Now, A-bodies have conflicting angles in the back. The way the suspension is designed with the upper arms going out like this and the lowers like that, they're opposing. And so there's conflicting angles constantly working in the back. Well, when the suspension is moving up on GM knows this. And so when they originally designed the arms the way they did and what have you, the rubber bushings are taking up flex. There's flex going on there. But then the control arm itself at a certain point is going to flex a little bit as well. And it takes some of the loads off there because there's a twisting load that goes into here as the differential moves through its arc, okay? Well, later on they came up with boxed lower control arms from GM, which made them really stiff. The arm themselves is stiffer. They still had the rubber bushings. But in those particular vehicles and stuff, they also then added a frame support. It's a stamp plate that went from the lower control arm here and up to the upper control arm mount on the cross member on the top. And they did that to help support the load here because now that that lower control arm is boxed, there's less flex there, and now that load's going into the bushing here and into the pickup point. And so they wanted to reinforce that. Well, nowadays we've got so many different types of bushings out there and different control arms, what have you. You really need to be aware of what's going on. In all of our control arms that we make for an A-body, we have a bearing system that's in here, and we're going to talk about that in another video. But the bearing actually reduces the load in this particular area. Other bushings that are out there, you need to look at whether they do or they don't. The main thing is they got to be able to articulate properly. So this frame support that we have here is something you really want to consider for any high-performance application and also any of the high-performance aftermarket arms. You really need to look at putting additional support on this bracket. So I'm going to show you how these actually install real quick. And in the kit here, we have these spacers that come in the kit, and there's washers and nuts and what have you. And on this side over here, we've already installed one, all right? And like I said, the lower control arm bolts are longer, and so are the uppers. I'm going to slide over here and show you. On this particular side here, you'll notice there's a spacer, these thicker spacers, okay, like so. There's one on the inside here, and there's one on the inside here. Now on this side, the reason why we do that is we want this particular support to bolt on without forcing it on. And sometimes, because there's always a little bit of misalignment going on these frames, you have to do spacing on the support to get where you need to be. Now the other thing too is the lengths here. This is an adjustable length as well. So what we do when we install these is we put the first one up on the top here, run it down on here, and I'll show you on the other side how we move it to get our length and what have you, and how we determine what spacers are on there. But it's really quite simple. So on this side, our example here has the wide spacers on the inside top and bottom. So now we come over to this side. Now this particular side here, the way this is going to go together, we've already checked it out. And for us to make this work, we had put the wide spacer on the outside the thin washer on the inside. Now this all slides through the assembly to the upper control arm. And then on the lower control arm, we give you the longer bolts, of course. The bolt's right here. You might be able to see it coming out there. And we determined that we needed to run a thick washer on the bottom. Okay. So this slides up into here. This rotates. You can see here, this is backed off, and this rotates. And you set your length. You may have to, when we ship them to you, they're not preset. So you're going to have to adjust these. And what you do is you swing it up into position and so that it lines up with your bolt. And so it pushes through just like that without resistance. So in this particular case, I needed a thin washer up here and the thick one went to the outside, where here the thick one was on the inside and the thin washer will now go on the outside. Okay? At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. The whole idea is just getting everything bolted down properly and not have all this in bind. So we give you all these extra pieces in here to get you where you need to be. And of course, once you get this together, this jam nut here will just run on down and you'll tighten that. The way the bolts torque is they're 70 foot-pounds of torque in this kit. They're half-inch bolts. If you're running our control arms that have the bearing system in there, you can torque them when it's up in the air. It doesn't really matter. If it's a rubber bushing that you're running and you're still running these, you'll have to have the car on the ground or at least loaded when you torque your bushings. The bolts are all going to be at 70 foot-pounds, all right? So we have two different kits, TS47 for 64 through 67, TS82 for 68 through 72. This is really something you should be interested in, especially if you're doing autocross, drag race, street, high horsepower. You really want to protect your frame. The TS kits are something you should look at.